So in general, if we think of NIS2 and we couple the fact that management of OESs, operators of essential services, are concerned by NIS2, and the fact that organization might be fined even to the extent of losing their licenses to provide their services and pay a lot of fines if they lack compliance, it might make CISOs, for example, life very easy from a budget allocation and approval perspective.
That was Arik Diamant, Principal Solution Architect for EMEA at Claroty. Now, in January 2023, the European Union adopted a new version of the Network and Information Security Directive. And it's this NIS2 that is aiming to get the EU up to speed and establish a higher level of cybersecurity and resilience within organisations across the European Union. And EU member states will have to transpose NIS2 into their national legislation by October the 17th, 2024. That's right, only 12 months away. So organisations should already be preparing their journey towards this compliance. But what's new in NIS2? How can businesses prepare their organisations for NIS2? And what are the penalties in not being compliant in 12 months' time? These are just a few of the talking points that today's podcast is going to be all about. But I don't want to reveal too many spoilers. So with that stage set, buckle up and hold on tight, because today I'm going to be beaming your ears all the way to Paris, where today's guest is waiting to talk about all things NIS2 and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
So my name is Arik Diamant. I'm a Principal Solution Architect for Claroty in EMEA in Europe. I'm coming from the industrial automation part of things. I'm an electrical engineer and I specialize in automation and robotics, and I worked a lot with Siemens. And now working all across Europe on major projects that we have in helping organization improving the physical cyber world.
Awesome. Well, it's a huge pleasure to have you on the podcast. There's so much I wanted to talk with you about today, especially around the Network and Information Security Directive, or the newer version, NIS2, versus things like GDPR. And given the impact of NIS2, and it's expected to be similar to that of GDPR, can you explain some of the parallels and distinctions between these two in terms of compliance challenges and benefits for organisations too? Because I think it's something we're going to be hearing more and more about, especially as it is Cybersecurity Month as well.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, thanks for having me, Neil. Around GDPR and NIS2, so actually GDPR and NIS2, they addresses different things. They can meet, but those things are a bit different. So for example, GDPR concerns deals more with personal data, while NIST and NIS2, we had the NIST1 and now we have the NIS2, concerns the security of systems. For example, NIST it covers digital data, which doesn't just include personal data, but any data relating to network and information systems and the provisioning and continuity. Okay, so there's different things, but as I mentioned, they can meet. So there might be considerable overlapping between those two. This incident can also be a personal data breach. So a cyber attacker has, just as an example, has undertaken an initial attack on a service and subsequently compromised personal data that the service processes. So something like a customer information. And so the initial attack and the disruptive effect could comprise the NIS incident, whilst the access to personal data could comprise the personal data. This is an example of how they meet. From a compliance perspective, since GDPR touches also on security and NIS touches on data inside the network, compliant with one can really help with the compliance with the other.
Before you came on the podcast, I was reading that you stated that for every chief information security officer out there, NIS2 is actually a dream come true for them. So can you elaborate on some of the specific elements that make this regulation so favourable for people in cybersecurity leadership?
So in general, if we think of NIS2, and we couple the fact that management of OESs, operators of essential services, are concerned by NIS and NIS2, and the fact that organization might be fined even to the extent of losing their licenses to provide their services and pay a lot of fines if they lack compliance, it might make CISOs, for example, life very easy from a budget allocation and approval perspective. So, for example, just as an example, in NIS2, we have what we call Article 21. It's Article 21 explains what we need to do from a risk management perspective. So one of the objectives of Article 21 is it revolves around incident detection and incident response. So this can help a CISO in getting budget to purchase IDSs, intrusion detection systems. So, for example, this is one of the things that we do in Claroty. We provide the OT, ICS, and industrial control systems, specialized IDSs, intrusion detection systems. So this can really facilitate the life of a CISO once he spread the word around the organization that Mr. Manager, you're very, very concerned by NIS2, and the organization as a whole is very concerned by NIS2, and I need the budget to take this and that boxes. Okay. Of course, those cybersecurity leaders will need to explain how they envision the compliance with NIS2 to demonstrate the way they intend to comply with those things. But for sure and definitely, this will make their lives easy. And I think, generally speaking, we can say that CISOs will become more of leaders and guide to the organization, that will become more dependent on them than just the advisors that they are today. Yeah.
And for anybody listening, hearing about NIS2 for the very first time, the regulation's coming into effect on October 17th next year in 2024, which is exactly a year away. So organizations have limited time to begin preparing for this. So I've got to ask, for anyone listening, give them something valuable to take away here. Are there any key steps that companies should be taking immediately to be sure that they are compliant in time for when this launches?
Yeah, so that's a very important question here. So indeed, time is of essence, and there isn't a lot of time. And I urge always people that I speak to, some of our customers, my customers, I urge them to try and to start this NIS2 compliance journey as soon as possible. And I'll state a few things that organization can actually do. So first of all, to determine whether they are concerned by NIS2. Not every organization, not every service provider is concerned by NIS2. So organizations needs to check out and verify whether they are a part of the NIS2 game or journey, or they are they are concerned by they will be regulated under NIS2. They should, for example, appoint a representative, a NIS2 focal point for the organization that will deal with the authorities, the cybersecurity authorities, around the NIS2 compliance. An organization can educate, so a CISO can educate his managers, can educate the management, it can spread the word around the organization that NIS2 is coming. It can mention sanctions and fines and the fact that we can even lose the license to provide the services. So this is something which is extremely important. Another thing that we can do is, which is also vital, I would say, is tick the boxes around the Article 21. So again, Article 21 is a list of requirements, things that must be done. It doesn't state yet how to do it, but it's a list of things to do. All kinds of risk management measures. So, for example, incident detection, incident response, multi-factor authentication, encryption, network hygiene, network security. And all of those requires policies inside the organization, require purchasing of tools, require work to be done to install those tools, to use those tools, a risk assessments and all of that. So those are things that definitely must be organization must, and I recommend start doing already. And of course, all of those activities and tools require more budget, require more money. So organization can plan and cost those budget increases. Another thing which is also an important pillar of NIS2 is incidents reporting. So with NIS1, we had an obligation, I think if I recall correctly, to report after 72 hours. With NIS2, if in case of an incident, we have to report immediately after the first 24 hours, and then a second report after 72 hours, and then a final one after a month. So an organization can put in place an incidents reporting plan. Who and whom and what should we do in order to properly report an incident? We should assess the supply chain security. So supply chain is a big thing with NIS2. All kinds of vulnerabilities, supply chain vulnerabilities like Log4j, Log4Shell, for example, needs to be addressed. So that's a very important thing. We need to plan for business continuity, crisis management. Another important thing in NIS2 is vulnerability management and vulnerability disclosure. There'll be some kind of like a across Europe vulnerability database, and organization must report on vulnerabilities in their environments, in their networks. And of course, we can conduct all kinds of security tests and audits to improve security. So improve this important point where security meets compliance. Okay, so this is all kinds of ideas that can be done. If I'm allowed to touch a little bit more on things that are closer to me, which is OT and ICS cybersecurity. So I mentioned again Article 21. It speaks about network and information security, vulnerability management, incidents detection, incidents prevention, reporting. So, for example, companies like Claroty, we provide tools that can help organizations in excavating information from OT environments, linking this information to databases of vulnerability, so we can provide a very precise vulnerability management and risk management. We can provide detection, and all of those things takes time. So to get into an ICS environment, we all know ICS OTs are production, electricity, grids, water, desalination, wastewater facilities. All of those are very sensitive environments. So to plan what's needed to tick those boxes from NIS2 takes time. We need to deal with the design of the solution. Sometimes we have a lot of sites. If it's a production environment, we have organizations that have 60 or 70 sites. So all of those measures, if we are looking at critical national infrastructure of providers of essential services, it takes a lot of time. And again, time is of essence, and I strongly urge and recommend to start dealing with all of those activities as soon as possible.
And I think as well, due to the economic climate, high inflation, etc., 12 months is not very long for leaders concerned about the lengthy process of securing budget allocation. So in your view, how should organisations be allocating budgets to effectively meet NIS2 requirements? And are there any pitfalls in financial planning that companies should possibly avoid? I know it's easier said than done, but are there anything that you can recommend?
Yeah, so indeed, I totally agree, Neil. Indeed, the 12 months, even more, is really a little bit, really a drop in the ocean of time which is needed. So pitfall and a recommendation, I would say, in terms of, let's start with the pitfalls. So it's really hard to make some kind of like a linear equation. So to say, hey, yeah, I'm an electrical grid, that's my size. I will need and this and that budget. So to create a linear equation between cost and the type of the organization, maybe the size of the organization, to extract a specific budget. But if we follow all of those steps that I mentioned before, and of what can be done in order to tick the NIS2 boxes, and mainly around Article 21. So starting by ticking all of those boxes one after the other, getting a pricing from vendors, doing all kinds of risk assessment, understanding our environment. All of those kinds of things can give organization already at those early stages, I think, a good overview of what budgets which budgets might be required, and of course later on, as time goes by, there'll be more fine tuning around those budgets and understanding of the NIS requirement in the organizations. But let's say to start with those kinds of approaches of looking at those specific requirements, everything I mentioned around reporting, incidents response, and all kinds of those kinds of things can give a good understanding it even at early stage.
100% with you there. And this too also, of course, requires organizations to assess the cybersecurity of their supply chain. And I think we've all seen over the last few years how fragile that can be. So what kind of challenges are you seeing here, and how can organizations work in a more collaborative way with their suppliers to enhance that security?
Yeah, very good question. Indeed, a very important pillar of and a new thing that was added to NIS2 is the supply chain. And my personal view, I think what really ignited the whole thing is mainly around this log4j, log4shell vulnerability. We all woke up one morning into a reality where we have something like I remember reading somewhere about 8% of all of the Java code spread around the world providing a remote code execution path for hackers and attackers into network. So that was, I think, that something that struck a nerve around the supply chain. In NIS2, we have actually Directive number 52, I think, speaks about promoting the use of open source. So it's not like the EU bans the use of open source. There is an actual directive that mentions that we should promote the use of open source as an important means for small and medium organizations to reduce cost. By using such tools, it's actually this directive actually explicitly mentions cybersecurity tools. But having said that, it's really important for us to see how things are done around all of those, the usage of open source. And again, an example from my personal life and work, I hope it's fine, from OT environments. The supply chain cybersecurity in OT. So a lot of people think that PLCs are those industrialized PCs, let's call them, managing the industrialized processes. Most people think that they are completely safe against vulnerabilities like log4j, and they're not exposed to this vulnerability. But in OT environments, in factories, and again, water facilities, on ships, in nuclear environments, we also have what we call SCADA servers. So those are systems that shows what's going on in the process, extract information. We have OPC servers. All of those have web interfaces. And actually, mentioning PLCs, they also have web servers nowadays. So how can we deal with the whole thing? When it comes to OT, I think first thing that can be done is to overcome the first and most important challenge in OT cybersecurity. This is like, and this challenge is how to get the asset inventory. What do I have in my environment? How do I do that? In a safe way, I can use tools like for example, Claroty has all kinds of tools. Other vendors have all kinds of tools that allows us to excavate information safely from an ICS environment using all kinds of methods that corresponds to the industrial way. So once I have the asset inventory, for example, I know that I have Siemens PLCs or Siemens devices. And once I know that I have those Siemens devices in my ICS environment, I can speak to Siemens. I can deal with those with patching. So for example, Siemens has published an advisory that explains how Log4j affects its product, including industrial edge management and more than a dozen other packages of softwares and devices with remediation information available. So using those tools to get information about the environment, using SBOM, diving deeper into what we have, can really help in dealing with the supply chain requirements of NIS2.
And I'm curious, how do you envision the role of, let's say, national authorities in this new framework? Are there any lessons that member states might be able to learn from one another, do you think?
Important question. Another very important question, Neil. Thanks for that. So the new rules, significantly new rules that will be put in place based on the directives will significantly actually improve the way that the EU prevents and handle and responds to mainly also local, but also large-scale cybersecurity incidents and crises. They do so by introducing clear responsibilities, appropriate planning, and more EU cooperation. So, for example, from a NIS2 directive, so we have an article, Article 9, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember the directive by heart, but I'm quite sure it's Article 9, which is the article around national cyber crisis management framework. So this article states that actually each member state of the EU should adopt a national large-scale cybersecurity incidents and crisis response plan. So now we're looking at things from a national perspective, and where the objectives are to manage large-scale cybersecurity incidents and crises. And in this Article 9, there's a list of all kinds of information details. So the objective of the national measures and activities, the task and responsibilities, national preparedness measures, including all kinds of exercises and training and other things. So for example, the existing cyber authorities in each and every one of the EU countries. So for example, in France, we have the ANSSI. In Belgium, we have CCB. In the UK, we have the NCSC. So those organizations will be much more active with NIS2, will have more responsibilities. The authorities in each and every one of the countries will make sure that essential and important operators of essential services will do what's needed to defend themselves. There is a slight difference between essentials and important. So mainly the essentials will be audited on a continuous basis by the national authorities. Important most likely when there is an incident, but definitely the NIS2 directive set in place the framework for each and every one of those countries to improve, and what to do to improve the security from a national perspective, and of course later on also from a global EU perspective.
And one of the key elements of NIS2 that stood out for me is the mandate for organisations to share information and collaborate. Such a forward-thinking approach here, but of course, how should companies navigate that balance between sharing the critical information while also maintaining a competitive advantage?
Interesting. So when it comes to information sharing and collaboration and cooperation, so we have one of the directives that mentioned that member states should contribute to the establishment of the EU cybersecurity crisis response framework. So a framework overseeing all of the crisis response in the EU. Okay, so that's one thing. The NIS2 the directive requires member states to appoint national authorities responsible for cyber crisis management, and from a global perspective to introduce a national large-scale cybersecurity incidents and crisis response plan. Also, there is the establishment of a body which is called the EU Cyclone, so establishment of the European Cyber Crisis Liaison Organization Network to support the coordinated management of large-scale cybersecurity incidents and crisis at operational level, which actually means that there'll be an overseeing authority in EU working rigorously, continuously on a day-to-day basis with all of the local authorities in each and every one of the countries. So in essence, people will know people will know the policies, and once there is a major crisis, cybersecurity incidents in each and every one of the country, and maybe globally, in the EU, there'll be already placed all of the policies, and people will know whom to call, and things will be working automatically to deal with this incident. Why is that? Why can that be interesting and important? So, for example, again, from an OT perspective, we had some time back. I think it was a year or 2 years ago. There were some attacks on actually Ukraine at the beginning of the war, and a few years before there were attacks on Kiev electrical grids. So there was a malware which was called InDestroyer, and then there was 2 years ago InDestroyer 2. And so this malware were one of the major ones that actually attacked a OT equipment. So the malware were attacking what we called RTU, remote terminal units. Those are devices that manages the distribution of electricity, how to raise power, lower power, all kinds of things like that in electrical substations. Those are the sites that distribute and transform the electricity. So if one organization in one country knows that he's suffering from this kind of an attack, it sees the behavior of this kind of malware in its own network, and it reports to others, they can already quite quickly prepare and adjust the network defenses against such a malware. So the collaboration and cooperation is as you said, Neil, very important, and it's one of the major pillars of the NIS, the new NIS, and the EU cooperation is really taken forward by NIS2 by allowing and actually imposing on the member state to act jointly and to tackle emerging security risks together. Wow.
And as we've mentioned a few times, October 17th, 2024, a year away. We've talked about the importance of getting ready for this and not leaving it too late. But I've got to ask, what are the penalties that organisations should be aware of if they do fail to comply with NIS2? Do you think that the punishments are similar to or worthy of the risks involved here? What are you seeing?
So from a punishment perspective, it can even reach sums like 10 million euros. So from a fines perspective, we can get to up to 2% of the total over a worldwide annual turnover of an essential organization, or maybe and 1.5 of the annual turnover of an important organization. So we're dealing with a really big sums of money. And so the new NIS directive, it puts actually supervision and enforcement at the heart of the task of the competent authorities in each and every one of the countries. Another thing that I can think of is that there is an actual minimal list of supervisory means through which the competent authorities may supervise essential and important entities. So, for example, it can include regular and targeted audits. It can include on-site, off-site checks and visits, all kinds of requesting of information, access to documentation and evidence of the fact that organizations are putting in place security plans, reporting plans, incidents detection and response plans. And of course, as we mentioned before, there is the liability of personal liability on management of organization in failing with the compliance of the NIS2 directive. So bottom line, I would say when it comes to consequences of non-compliance, so we are looking at great and greater fines, the personal approach that wasn't here when it comes to NIS1, and again, even to the point of withdrawal of licensing to operate and provide those essential services in the case of lack of compliance. Now, answering the second part of your question, Niels, is it enough with regards and comparison to the risk? It's really hard to tell.
Yeah.
But I can say that from my day-to-day life, doing what I do now for Claroty, I can say that there is already a lot of traction around NIS2 and NIS2 compliance. Organizations are coming to us, asking us, how can we help? Which tools should be used? How can we help in the reporting? Which NIS2 reports, compliance report we can provide? So I would say that definitely the EU is definitely doing something right here when it comes to all of those enforcement mechanisms. Yeah.
And we have covered a very important topic today around how NIS2 aims to get the EU up to speed and establish a higher level of cybersecurity and resilience within organisations of the European Union. But before I let you go, I've got to have a bit of fun with you before we wrap things up today. Now, I suspect in your career, you've picked up many stories from your time in the field, earning your stripes in the world of cybersecurity. So is there a funny or interesting story that has happened in your career that you can leave everyone with today?
Yeah. So one which I really like personally, I tell people from time to time is there is this cute little book which is called How to Win Friends and Influence People. I guess a lot of people read it. It was published at the beginning of the 20th century. It's a small little book with a lot of lessons about how to deal with people. Yeah, it's things that we all know, things that we all seen based on our experience, but it's really nice, and it's a book that I read from time to time just to fine-tune my approach to people. And because I work a lot with people around sales and the designing of cybersecurity solution and things like that, I like from time to time to read a few pages, even though I read that book already some years ago. So I had an interesting engagement with a very important energy customer of Claroty. We were on a POC with this organization, and the previous evening I read a little bit from that book. And I actually read the piece where it mentions that people are not always really impressed or interested by what we sell them. They are much more interested, even if it's subconsciously, they are more interested with the effect of what we try to sell them on their own lives. So I read that piece. The next morning I woke up, I had the presentation, 2 hours presentation with this organization, and I took 15 minutes just before the presentation, I told myself, how can I really talk to them their own language, their own subconscious language? And so I tweaked the presentation to really to show them in a very detailed way how things that we do, what things that functionalities that exist in our platforms, how can it makes their life simple and not overload them with another security tool that they need to look at every day or something like that. So I really directed the functionalities towards how it embeds in the overall security orchestration, but and how it actually how it will help them, and make their life, very busy life, easy. And so I gave the presentation. It went really well. They asked lots of questions, very, very engaged. It's not always the case. Sometimes people are more interested. Sometimes people are less interested. But this meeting, I felt that there was a lot of engagement. And a few days later, the partners where we were working with called me and he told me, Arik, really, it was the really good presentation. They really loved what you showed them, and it was great. And we won the project, and we do a lot of deployment with this company. And for me, it implants in my head that message that it's really, really important once we speak to people, regardless of whom. It can be friends, it can be a you and me, it can be a neighbor, it can be my manager, it can be a customer, to really to see how things, where things meet those person in their own life, in their own mind, in their own interests, in their own difficulties. So that's it's not something that you've never heard of before, Neil, not something I didn't think of before, but it's really, for me, it was a real vivid example of how important this is.
What a great story. Absolutely love it. And for anyone listening would like to dive a little bit deeper into anything we talked about today, obviously this is a story, or this is something very close to your heart. So where's the best place for anybody listening to continue this conversation? Maybe contact you or your team, or just find out more information about Claroty. Where would you point everyone?
Yeah, definitely. We can share my email address, and of course, everybody interested in that. Of course, there is interesting materials on the web, YouTube. When it comes to how Claroty can help, I'll be glad to help anyone that's interested in discovering to which depth and width we can help organization with this very, very important new NIS2.
Excellent. Well, I'll add links to the website and some information, and maybe a video as well, so people can find you nice and easily. Just love talking with you today about how NIS2 is expected to revolutionize the way we think about cybersecurity, and by forcing organizations to provide strategy objectives, outline how they will handle incident response, and more importantly, share information and collaborate. It is a dream come true for CISOs. And although we pointed out a few times there, it's coming into effect in 12 months' time. It isn't long. We need to ensure that the potential success of NIS2 is not wasted by companies. But more than anything, thank you for bringing it all to life today, providing a few examples as well. Really enjoyed talking with you today. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Neil. Have a nice day.
So consider this your wake-up call. You now know what NIS2 is, how to prepare, how long you've got left for this legislation, just 12 months, and the consequences of non-compliance. But what does this mean to you and your organisation? I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you're preparing, how you're not preparing, whatever it may be. Anything NIS2 related, I'd love to hear more about it. And also what your opinions of it are. And as Arik rightly said, it's a CISO's dream come true, but businesses and C-suite may not see it that way initially. But again, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, just @NeilC.Hughes. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and what you're doing or not doing. Other than that, I'll be back again tomorrow. I've got another guest lined up for you all. So just a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.